I left a letter for my cheating wife in her favorite book and filed for divorce. When she finally read it, months later, she showed up at my house sobbing. Sup Reddit. Grab some snacks. This one's intense. Name's Connor, 34 male. And there I was, standing in my living room, watching my wife of 9 years being too intimate with another man. The party was my idea. I'm an architect. I design houses for a living. Somehow I also designed a situation where my wife gets handsy with a venture capitalist in front of 23 people. The house was in the hill country outside Austin. Custom build, 3 years of work, poured into every beam and window placement. Cantilevered limestone and reclaimed cedar, floor-to-ceiling glass that framed the hills like nothing you'd find at Home Goods. The foundation alone took 8 months because the previous soil survey was garbage and I had to bring in a geotechnical engineer who charged $400 an hour to confirm what I already suspected. The house won 2 regional design awards, got featured in a magazine that Meredith loved mentioning at parties but never actually read. She'd wave her hand at the windows and tell guests how her husband designed every inch of this place, like she understood what any of it meant. Meredith handled the guest list. Crisis communications was her job. She spent her days spinning disasters into opportunities for executives who couldn't keep their stories straight, CEOs with harassment complaints, politicians with financial irregularities, startups with products that didn't actually work. She'd reframe the whole story until nobody remembered what the original problem was. She was paid well for it too. Better than me most years. Not that I minded. I married her when we were both broke. The money was never the issue. She was genuinely excellent at it. Turns out she was even better at managing her own situation. His name was Dominic Vance. Venture capital guy out of San Francisco who'd been circling Austin money for about a year. The kind of guy who walks into a room and immediately starts sizing up everyone's net worth. He had this energy that sucked the oxygen out of conversations. Everything was a deal. Everyone was either a future investment or a waste of his time. He shook hands like he was trying to establish dominance, holding on a beat too long while staring you down like he dared you to look away first. Meredith had been working with him for about 8 months. His fund was acquiring a medical device company with messy optics, and she was supposed to make him look like a savior instead of a vulture. Late nights at the office, weekend strategy sessions, business calls at midnight that she took in the other room with the door closed and her voice pitched lower than usual. I'd noticed the patterns. I'm not stupid, despite what you might think given that I threw a party where my wife fondled another man in my own living room. But I was raised to trust people until they gave you concrete evidence otherwise. My old man was married to my mother for 41 years. Never once accused her of anything without proof. He said suspicion without evidence was just weakness, pretending to be intuition. So I watched. I gathered data. I waited for something concrete. That night, I got it. Dominic was holding court near the fireplace. Maybe 8 people around him, including Meredith. He was telling some story about a startup he'd flipped in Phoenix, fired half the employees, rebranded the product, sold it to a bigger fish for triple what he'd paid. I was by the window, 15 feet away, sparkling water in hand, watching the room the way I always did at these things. Old habit. Meredith laughed at something Dominic said. Not her normal laugh. The theatrical one where she threw her head back. I used to think that laugh was charming, back when she used it for my jokes. She stumbled slightly on her heels. Not enough to fall. Just enough to need steadying. The kind of stumble that might be accidental, or might be staged so subtly even she didn't realize she was doing it. Dominic's hand shot out. He placed his palm flat against the small of her back. His fingers spread across the fabric of her dress, and his thumb moved in a small circle against her spine. Rubbing. Familiar. Like he owned her. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. She leaned into it. Just for a second. Her body angled toward him like a compass, finding north. Then she straightened up, stepped back, and glanced at Dominic with this soft look I hadn't seen directed at me since our honeymoon 9 years ago. Then she looked at me. Her face reset to hostess mode so fast it was almost impressive. Smile locked. Eyes scanning the room to make sure everyone had drinks. Perfect act. She'd had years of practice performing for people. I just hadn't realized I was one of the people she was performing for. I didn't react. Didn't throw my glass. Didn't storm over and make a scene that would become the only thing anyone remembered about the party. I just stood there doing the math. The weird thing is, I wasn't even that upset yet. That came later. In the moment, I was just cold. I could have made a scene. Demanded answers she'd never give honestly. But Meredith was a professional crisis manager. This was literally what she did for a living. If I accused her without documentation, she'd gaslight me into next week, call me paranoid, point out that Dominic was just being friendly, that I was stressed from work, that I was seeing problems where none existed. She'd make me apologize for embarrassing her. She'd spin the whole thing until I was the bad guy. So I finished my sparkling water, smiled at a colleague who walked past, played the perfect host for the rest of the night, even told Dominic it was good to see him when he left. That night, after everyone was gone and Meredith was asleep, I went to my study and wrote a letter. The letter wasn't emotional. No accusations, no begging, no plea for explanation. Just facts. I typed it on my laptop at 2 in the morning while Meredith slept the guilt-free sleep of someone who genuinely believed she was getting away with everything. The document was titled Notice of Separation and Preservation of Evidence. Dated. Time-stamped. It stated that as of that date, I considered our marriage irretrievably broken due to circumstances I had directly observed. It established boundaries. No joint financial decisions without written agreement. No deletion of electronic communications. No entry to the home office without my presence. All future communication regarding the marriage to occur through legal counsel. Cold. The kind of letter you'd write to a contractor who violated their agreement, not to a spouse of 9 years. I printed 2 copies. Signed both with the date written out longhand. Emailed a PDF to myself with a timestamp, then forwarded it to a folder I labeled legal that I'd share with an attorney later. Then I did something petty, or strategic, depending on how you look at it. Meredith had a copy of The Great Gatsby on her home office bookshelf. She'd bought it 2 years ago, claiming she wanted to revisit the classics. She loved telling people at dinner parties how much the symbolism of the green light resonated with her, how Fitzgerald captured the hollow pursuit of status so perfectly. She'd never opened the book. The bookmark was still on page 3, exactly where it had been since the day she brought it home. I slid the letter between the pages of chapter 7, the climax of the novel, where everything falls apart in the heat of summer. If she ever actually read the book she claimed to love, she'd find it. If she was the woman she pretended to be at dinner parties, the intellectual who resonated with literary symbolism, the warning would show up within days. I knew better. The next 3 weeks were an exercise in controlled observation. I stopped being the perfect husband. Not in any way Meredith would notice immediately. I just stopped going out of my way. Stopped leaving lights on when she worked late. Stopped asking about her day when she got home at midnight with her phone buzzing. Stopped pretending I believed the excuses about traffic on Mopac or difficult clients or meetings that ran 4 hours longer than scheduled. Instead, I watched. The patterns were obvious once I stopped looking away from them. Tuesday nights she had standing strategy sessions that ran until 10. Except I checked her firm's shared calendar when she left her laptop open, and there were no standing meetings on Tuesdays. Thursday afternoons she had client lunches that lasted until 5. But when I casually mentioned one of those clients at a networking event, he looked confused and said he hadn't seen Meredith in 4 months. Weekend mornings, she went to the gym. But her gym bag never had wet towels when she came back. Her hair was always freshly done, not post-workout messy. She smelled like hotel soap and someone else's cologne. I started keeping a log. Dates, times, stated excuse versus actual car location via the Find My app we'd set up 2 years ago after her Lexus got stolen from a parking garage. Nothing invasive, nothing illegal. Just observations any spouse would notice if they stopped being willfully blind. Week 2, I called a divorce attorney. His name was Ray. Mid-50s, former prosecutor. The kind of guy who looked like he'd seen every possible way a marriage could blow up and stopped being surprised by any of it. His office was downtown, 9th floor of a building that used to be a bank. Ray came out exactly 2 minutes after my scheduled time. He didn't offer sympathy when I explained the situation. He offered strategy. I liked him immediately. Texas is a community property state, he said, not looking up from his legal pad. Fault grounds exist, but judges don't love them. We file on insupportability, which just means the marriage is broken. What matters is the property division and protecting your separate property contribution. Following me so far? I told him I was following. Good. He looked up and put down his pen. Here's the only rule that matters. No emotional conversations with her. None. 0. Everything goes through paper. You want to say something? You write it down. You send it to me first. You feel the urge to confront her, to demand answers, to have some big blowout fight, you call me instead, and I'll talk you out of it. Paper creates evidence. Conversations create he said, she said. Got it? I told him I got it. That rule became my operating system for the next 6 months. Every time I wanted to confront Meredith, every time I wanted to demand an explanation or ask her why, I reminded myself, everything through paper. I told him about the letter I'd written, the timestamp. Ray actually smiled. First time since I'd walked in. That's smart. If she ever claims she didn't know things were bad, we have a dated document proving otherwise. Keep that email thread. Don't tell her about the physical copy. Let her claim she was blindsided. We'll introduce the letter during discovery. I told him about the house. Custom build, my design, 3 years of construction. Titled in both our names because that's what married couples do. But I'd put significant separate property into the down payment. Inheritance from my grandmother that I'd kept in a segregated account specifically because my father had drilled into me never to commingle inherited money. You have documentation on that inheritance? Bank records showing it stayed separate until the purchase. Every statement, every transfer receipt, Kept it all in a fireproof safe since the day I opened the account. He nodded approvingly. Most people don't keep records like that. They mix inherited money with joint accounts and can't trace anything when it matters. You're already ahead of 90% of the people who walk through my door. I walked out of that building feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 weeks. Control. Over myself. The financial picture came together faster than I expected, and it was uglier than I'd hoped. Ray had me pull 12 months of statements. Credit cards, bank accounts, anything with both our names on it. I spread everything across my drafting table like I was planning a crime scene investigation, color-coded by category, cross-referenced by date, every weird charge highlighted in yellow, and there was a lot of yellow. By the time I finished, my drafting table looked like something from a detective show. The patterns weren't just bad. They were insulting. Dinner charges at restaurants I'd never heard of. A steakhouse in the Domain. 6 separate visits over 4 months. Average bill around $220. A French place on South Congress showed up 8 times. I looked up the menu online. Escargot, duck confit, $70 bottles of sparkling water. The kind of place you take someone you're trying to impress, not somewhere you go for a casual work dinner. Meredith had told me she didn't like French food. Said it was pretentious. I guess pretentious tastes better when you're eating it with your affair partner. Hotel charges in downtown Austin on nights. Meredith said she was working late at the office. That didn't make sense because her office was 20 minutes from our house, and we had 4 bedrooms. Why would someone need a hotel room 20 minutes from home? The question answers itself if you're not being willfully stupid about it. A jewelry purchase for $900 at a boutique in the Arboretum. I'd never seen her wear anything new. Not a necklace, not earrings, not a bracelet. Just a $900 charge for something that had apparently disappeared into thin air. Either she'd bought something for Dominic, or she'd bought something for herself that she only wore around him. Neither option was great. There was also a spa day at some place in the Domain. $240 for what the receipt called a couple's massage package. I was at work that day. I know because I checked my calendar. I built a timeline starting with the first weird charge 8 months ago and worked forward week by week. By the end, I had a spreadsheet with 39 separate charges that couldn't be explained by legitimate business or normal personal spending. 39. That's more than 1 per week for 8 months. She wasn't even being careful about it. Then, week 4, I found something worse. I got a credit monitoring alert. Someone had requested a credit report using my social security number. Standard stuff when you're applying for loans. Except I hadn't applied for any loans. I dug deeper, found paperwork Meredith had hidden in her desk drawer, underneath some old magazines she never read, an application for a home equity line of credit, $200,000 against the house. My signature on the application, except I'd never signed it. I'd never seen the application. I'd never agreed to leverage $200,000 against the home I'd designed and built. She'd forged my name, applied for a HELOC without telling me. The application was still pending, hadn't been approved yet, but she'd tried. She'd actually tried to take out $200,000 against our house by forging my signature. I photographed everything, sent copies to Ray. He called me within an hour. This changes things big time. Attempted fraud on a loan application is serious. Don't confront her about it. We use this during discovery. It goes to character and pattern of deception. 2 days later, the bank called the house. The application had been flagged by their fraud detection system. The signature didn't match samples on file. They were freezing the application pending verification. I told them I hadn't signed anything and suggested they contact my attorney. Ray sent a preservation letter to the lender that afternoon, requesting they retain all documentation related to the application. That letter would become Exhibit C. He told me not to try to block the application myself. Just confirm the fraud in writing, so it's on record. Let the bank handle their end. I didn't confront Meredith yet, but now I knew exactly who I was dealing with. And more importantly, so would her lawyer once discovery started. Enter Tessa. Tessa was Meredith's junior associate at the firm. 28, UT Austin grad, 4 years into a career that mostly consisted of doing Meredith's grunt work, while Meredith took credit with clients. I'd met her at firm events a few times. She always looked like she was running on 3 hours of sleep and pure spite. I respected the hustle even when I didn't know the full context. The full context, as I eventually learned, was that Meredith had been using her for 2 years. Client presentations that Tessa stayed up until 3 a.m. preparing, delivered by Meredith with Tessa's name nowhere in sight. Strategy memos that Tessa drafted, edited by Meredith with tracked changes that mostly just moved paragraphs around, then submitted to clients as Meredith's original work. Tessa was being set up for exactly one purpose: to take the blame if anything ever went wrong. Meredith had plausible deniability built into everything she did. If expense reports got audited, it was Tessa who processed them. If client communications had errors, it was Tessa who drafted the first version. Meredith was brilliant at passing off responsibility while taking all the credit. I didn't approach Tessa directly. That would have been stupid and potentially problematic. Instead, I started grabbing coffee at the shop near Meredith's office. Not every day, just often enough to become a familiar face. Third week, Tessa noticed me and waved me over to her table. She looked exhausted. Her laptop was open to a spreadsheet that seemed to stretch forever, columns of numbers representing hours of work nobody would ever thank her for. How are things at the house? Meredith's been stressed about this Vance account. I kept my face neutral. Yeah, she mentioned it's been a lot. Tessa hesitated. Something flickered across her face. Frustration, maybe. It's just, I've been covering her other clients while she focuses on him, and some of the expense coding has been weird. She lowered her voice. Hotel rooms coded as venue rentals, dinners coded as media buys. I had to redo 3 reports last month because the categories didn't match what was actually being charged. I nodded. That sounds frustrating. It really is. She glanced around to make sure nobody from the firm was nearby. There's an email thread I kept. Meredith told me to recode a dinner at Justine's as a media buy for the Collins account. She'd CC'd Mr. Vance on the original dinner invite, then told me to bury the paper trail. Her exact words were, "Just make it disappear, Tessa." I kept that entire email chain. That was the smoking gun. An email thread with Dominic's name on it, connected to expense manipulation, with Meredith explicitly ordering a cover-up. Tessa had saved it because she knew exactly what kind of person she was working for. If anyone ever asks about those expenses later, Tessa said, I want it documented that I flagged the problems. I told her the coding was wrong. She told me to process them anyway and stop asking questions. I thanked her for the conversation. Didn't push further. When the time came to provide a witness statement, Tessa was ready. And that email thread, with Dominic Vance's name right there in the CC line, became Exhibit B. The paperwork hit Meredith on a Wednesday morning, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't enjoy picking the timing. Ray wanted to serve her at the house. Standard procedure, minimal drama. But I knew Meredith better than Ray did. She cared more about her professional image than anything else in the world, including our marriage, including me. Serving her privately would give her time to spin the story, manage the narrative, control how information got out before anyone knew anything was happening. So we served her at work. Lobby of her office building on Congress Avenue. 9:15 in the morning, right as she was walking in for a client meeting. She was wearing the navy suit she saved for important days, carrying her leather portfolio, phone in hand, like an extension of her arm. She looked like a woman who had everything figured out. The process server walked right up, stated her full legal name, handed her the envelope, confirmed service. Meredith's face went through 6 expressions in 3 seconds. Confusion first, because why would someone be handing her an envelope in her office lobby? Recognition second, when she saw the return address. Anger third, quick and hot. Fear fourth, because suddenly her careful planning was getting blown up. Then the gears turning as she started figuring out how to spin this. And finally that polished professional mask snapping back into place because God forbid anyone see Meredith having an actual reaction. She took the envelope, thanked the server with a smile that could have frozen coffee, walked to the elevator like nothing had happened. Her hands were shaking. I heard about that detail later from someone who'd been standing nearby. The petition laid everything out. Date of separation per my letter. Request for temporary exclusive use of the residence based on my separate property contribution. Financial restraining orders preventing either party from wasting assets or making major purchases without court approval. Attached as Exhibit A, 39 charges documented with dates, amounts, and locations. Attached as Exhibit B, Tessa's email thread showing Dominic's name in the CC line and Meredith's explicit instruction to make expenses disappear. I didn't accuse her of adultery in the filing. Ray advised against it. Texas courts don't love adultery claims unless you've got rock-solid proof. Better to let the numbers and the email trail tell the story. Meredith called me that night. We need to talk about this like adults before lawyers get involved. I have a lawyer. You should get one too. Connor, this is crazy. Whatever you think is going on, we can work through it. We've been married for 9 years. Temporary orders hearing is in 12 days. Have your attorney call Ray's office to work out scheduling. I hung up. The temporary orders hearing went exactly how Ray predicted. The judge reviewed the financial documentation, noted the pattern of unexplained expenses during what Meredith claimed was a happy marriage, and granted temporary exclusive use of the residence to me. Then Meredith's attorney made a mistake. She tried to argue that Meredith had no idea there were problems in the marriage, that she'd been blindsided by the filing, that I'd never communicated my concerns or given her a chance to address them. Standard defense strategy. Paint the filing spouse as the aggressor who acted without warning. The problem with that strategy is it only works when there's no paper trail. Ray introduced the time-stamped email containing my separation letter, dated the night of the party, 4 months before the filing, establishing clear written notice of marital breakdown, boundaries, and evidence preservation requirements. Your Honor, Mr. Hartley provided written notice of his concerns the same week the issues arose. Mrs. Hartley received this document via email and chose not to respond, not to seek counseling, not to address the concerns in any way. The claim of being blindsided is directly contradicted by documentary evidence. Meredith's attorney looked at her client with the expression of a lawyer who'd just been sandbagged by incomplete information. Meredith's face went pale. She hadn't known about the letter. The email had probably gotten buried in her inbox, unread, because she was too busy managing Dominic's PR and her own double life to pay attention to messages from her husband. And she'd never found the physical copy because she'd never opened the book it was hidden in. The judge wasn't impressed with her side's argument. Meredith had 30 days to get her personal belongings and find somewhere else to live. She moved in with Dominic. The affair was officially out in the open. During the move, she packed up her home office, boxes everywhere, books getting shoved into cardboard without much thought. She was in a hurry, trying to get everything done before the deadline. She grabbed The Great Gatsby off the shelf, the book she'd owned for 2 years. The book she'd told dinner party guests was her favorite. It slipped, hit the edge of a box. The spine cracked and the pages fanned open. The envelope slid out onto the carpet. Her name on the front, my handwriting, block letters, dated. She picked it up, turned it over, saw the date from 4 months ago, the night of the party. She opened it, read the first line, notice of separation and preservation of evidence. She read the whole thing standing there in her half-packed home office, surrounded by boxes and the remains of a life she'd torched. When she finished, she sat down on the floor and stared at the pages. The warning had been there the whole time, right there on her bookshelf for 4 months. All she had to do was open the book she claimed to love. Discovery in a divorce means lawyers go through every financial decision you've made for years. It's not fun. The process took 4 months. 4 months of document requests, deposition scheduling, response deadlines, and lawyers' billing hours to argue about what counted as a legitimate business expense versus what counted as waste. My legal bills climbed past $20,000 and kept climbing, worth every dollar. Meredith's attorney fought the waste claims hard, filed responses arguing that the expenses were legitimate business costs, that the hotel rooms were for confidential client meetings that required secure space away from the office, that the dinners were networking events with potential clients and industry contacts, that the jewelry was a gift to herself she'd earned through her own work. Standard defense tactics. If you can't dispute the pattern, dispute the interpretation. Then Ray introduced the HELOC application, the forged signature. The attempt to leverage $200,000 against the house without my knowledge or consent. The application that was still sitting in a pending status at the bank, because apparently even lenders have fraud detection systems that catch things like signatures that don't match. Meredith's attorney had no response prepared. That's the thing about liars. They can't keep track of all their lies, especially when those lies are documented in applications they tried to hide in desk drawers. Eventually, the secrets come out at the worst possible moment. The HELOC thing changed the entire tone of the proceedings. Suddenly, this wasn't just about waste of community assets. This was about fraud, about deception on a whole different level. Then came Tessa's deposition, and that killed whatever credibility Meredith had left. 4 hours of testimony under oath, in a conference room downtown, with court reporters and attorneys on both sides taking notes. Meredith's own associate, the person she'd been using for 2 years, explaining in calm and detailed language that Meredith had explicitly instructed her to miscategorize personal expenses as client entertainment. The email thread was the centerpiece. Dominic Vance's name right there in the CC line of a dinner invitation, then Meredith's follow-up email telling Tessa to recode the expense and bury the paper trail. The exact words about making things disappear. All of it documented, time-stamped, saved by someone who knew exactly what kind of person she was working for. I wasn't allowed in the deposition room, but Ray told me about it afterward. He said Tessa was calm the entire time, professional. She answered questions with specific dates, specific emails, specific instances where she'd flagged problems and been told to ignore them. She'd kept her own records for exactly this kind of situation. Smart woman. She knew her boss was setting her up to take the fall, and she'd prepared accordingly. Meredith's attorney tried to paint Tessa as disgruntled, someone passed over for promotion who wanted revenge, someone who'd been underperforming and was looking for someone else to blame. But Tessa had receipts, email chains showing the instructions in Meredith's own words, calendar invites showing the fake meetings versus the real schedule, text messages she'd screenshotted and saved to her personal cloud, a paper trail that couldn't be dismissed by calling her bitter or disgruntled. The court found the waste claims credible. $19,000 credited to my side of the property division. Not punishment for cheating, just an accounting of money that was supposed to stay in the shared pot and didn't. The HELOC attempt was noted in the findings as evidence of attempted dissipation and possible fraud, which would factor into the final division. But the financial hit wasn't the worst part for Meredith. The real damage was professional, and it spread fast. When the divorce filings became part of the public record, When Tessa's testimony started making the rounds through Austin's small and very gossipy professional community, Meredith's firm launched an internal audit. Once you start pulling at financial threads, the whole thing tends to fall apart. The partners discovered years of systematic expense inflation, client entertainment budgets that didn't match actual client meetings, consulting fees paid to vendors who didn't seem to provide any actual consulting. Small amounts individually, but the pattern painted a picture. The partners gave her a choice: resign with a mutual separation agreement that would let everyone pretend nothing had happened, or face formal proceedings that would end up in front of the state bar and potentially destroy her entire career permanently. She resigned. The official story, for anyone who asked, was that Meredith was leaving to pursue new opportunities, spending more time on personal matters. All the usual stuff people say when they're trying to make getting pushed out sound like a lifestyle choice. Everyone in Austin's legal and communications community knew the real reason within about a week. Word travels fast when someone successful takes a sudden fall. People eat that up. The final property division took 5 months to negotiate, and it got ugly before it got settled. Meredith fought for the house like her life depended on it. And honestly, in a way it did. The house was her backdrop, the set piece for every carefully curated image of success she'd built over 9 years of marriage. Losing the house meant losing the stage. Without that stage, people might start looking at the actual person, and Meredith wasn't prepared for that kind of scrutiny. Her attorney argued she'd contributed to the marriage in non-financial ways and deserved the primary residence regardless of where the down payment came from. Emotional labor, household management, the invisible work that wives supposedly do while their husbands focus on their careers and their buildings and their drafting tables. The irony of Meredith claiming emotional labor after 9 years of treating me like furniture wasn't lost on me. Or on Ray, who actually laughed out loud when he read that section of her response brief. Sometimes even lawyers can't keep a straight face. But I had documentation proving my separate property contribution. The inheritance from my grandmother, traced through bank statements and transfer records like a forensic accountant's fever dream. $160,000 that stayed in a segregated account from the day I received it until the day I transferred it to the escrow company for the down payment. Never commingled. Never touched for joint expenses. Never mixed with community property in any way. Ray built an argument showing that my separate property should be credited back first, before any community division happened. Standard tracing claim under Texas law, but not everyone knows to document their inheritance properly. Most people mix the money with joint accounts and then can't prove anything when it matters. Her attorney tried to argue that by putting Meredith's name on the title, I'd converted my separate property into community property as a gift. It was a creative argument, the kind of thing attorneys throw at the wall hoping something sticks. Ray shut it down with case law and my paper trail. Gift arguments require evidence of donative intent, and there's nothing in the record suggesting I intended to give away my grandmother's money. Just a married couple putting both names on a house, because that's what married couples do. The judge agreed with us. I could keep the house by buying out her reduced share at current market value, minus her portion of the waste findings, minus her share of additional attorney fees caused by the HELOC fraud discovery. The net result was that I kept the home I designed for about 60% of what a normal buyout would have cost. The house was mine. Finally and completely. Her clients scattered faster than I expected. Some followed her initially out of loyalty to the relationship they thought they had. A state senator she'd worked with for 3 years. A tech CEO who'd been her biggest account. They were loyal right up until the details of the divorce started getting around. Then, they weren't loyal anymore. When word spread about the expense manipulation, about the circumstances of her departure from the firm, about the forged signature on a loan application, those clients found other representation. Nobody wants a crisis manager whose own crisis was caused by documented dishonesty. Meanwhile, Dominic was drowning in problems of his own making. The medical device founders filed a lawsuit claiming he'd misrepresented the acquisition terms. His limited partners demanded an audit of the entire fund. The investment he'd personally guaranteed came due, and he didn't have the cash to cover it. He had to liquidate other holdings at bad prices just to make the payment, which created more problems with more investors. Classic death spiral. His professional network, which had been his main asset, started pretending they'd never heard of him. That's how it works in finance. When you're up, everyone wants to know you. When you're down, nobody returns your calls. The guys who used to fight for seats next to him at conferences were suddenly too busy to take meetings. Their relationship didn't survive the pressure. I heard about it through mutual friends who didn't realize how much context I already had. Apparently, it started with money fights. Dominic expected Meredith to chip in on household expenses while she was job hunting. Meredith expected Dominic to support her the way she'd supported his image when things were good. Neither of them got what they expected. Lots of yelling, lots of blame. Meredith accused Dominic of dragging her down with his legal problems. Dominic accused Meredith of being toxic to his reputation and his ability to find new partners. Without the thrill of sneaking around, Without the status and money he used to represent, he was just a stressed guy who took his frustration out on whoever was closest. Turns out that's not sexy. Turns out that's just exhausting. Meredith moved out of his condo, rented an apartment in a part of Austin she used to crack jokes about when we drove through it, started applying for jobs at firms small enough that they might not Google her name too carefully, at least not past the first page of results. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday afternoon in late spring. I signed the papers in Ray's office, shook his hand, and walked out into the Austin heat feeling lighter than I had in over a year. The house was mine. My career was intact. My reputation was clean. My grandmother's money was protected. Meredith had lost the house, her job, her affair partner, and most of her professional network. 9 months after the divorce finalized, I'd heard through mutual friends that things had gotten worse for her. The job search wasn't going well. Firms in Austin knew her story, and firms in other cities could Google. She'd burned through whatever savings she had. The apartment she'd rented was in a complex that catered to recent college graduates. I'd also heard that Dominic had finally declared bankruptcy. The lawsuits had piled up, the guarantees had come due, and he'd run out of options. Then after all these months, she showed up at. When I opened the door that Sunday afternoon, I almost didn't recognize her. She'd lost weight in a way that said skipped meals. Her clothes were no longer the designer stuff she used to wear. The sharp confidence that had defined her for the entire time I'd known her was gone. "Can I come in?" I stepped outside instead, pulled the door closed behind me. After 2 minutes of awkward silence, she finally spoke. "I need help. Alone. Just enough to get me through a couple months until something comes through." I looked at her for a long moment. "No. Connor, please. Just a loan until I'm back on my feet. You forged my signature on a loan application. Tried to leverage $200,000 against this house without telling me." I shook my head. "No. That's not fair. It's not. You had the warning the whole time. Sitting in a book you claimed to love. You never looked." She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. "Goodbye, Meredith." I stepped inside and closed the door. Through the window, I watched her stand there for a minute. Then she walked to her car and drove away. The house was quiet. I went back to my drafting table. There was a beach house in Port Aransas that needed finishing. I had work to do. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.